Hello, everybody, friends and new friends. I'm Jane Susswine. I'm president of the
Oh, yeah.
Center, and delighted to welcome you. I see so many familiar names. It's wonderful. We are about to hear from Rabbi Arnold Rachlis and Rabbi Lee Friedlander, both of whom have reached the pinnacle of 50 years in the rabbinate. And we are going to hear their reflections on the influence of Mordecai Kaplan on their thinking and on their practice. So, Arnie.
Thank you, Jane. I'm so glad to see people too, and seeing Mel Skult here and Jeffrey, it's so everything we say can be checked by them and others to see if it's accurate. So I'm really honored to be able to do this. I've really devoted my life to Reconstructionism. I've enjoyed and celebrated the joys and the achievements, and I am sometimes sad and worried about the present and about the future. What attracted me to Reconstructionism was its rationalism, Kaplan's insistence on being free thinkers and I would emphasize thinkers. And he was able to reconceptualize, and this now, I have reread Kaplan over the years, but the moment I'm really thinking about now is the moment I first encountered Kaplan, which was when I was a sophomore at the University of Pennsylvania, taking a religious studies course with Bob Seltzer, who's a Jewish historian, who I just talked to on the phone last week. Actually, he's 90 years old. And he changed and the course was on modern Jewish thinkers, Kaplan being one. He changed my whole way of seeing Judaism through the study of Kaplan. Came from a conservative background, somewhat right-wing conservative background, religiously. And to understand Kaplan, the term often used about him is he was a religious anthropologist more than a theologian. We were able to see, I think, Judaism from the human side, not from the divine side. And Kaplan opened up, he used the term for his synagogue, Society for the Advancement of Judaism. Why? Because he was competing with Felix Adler, who was reaching Jewish intellectuals in New York with his Society for Ethical Culture, because Kaplan understood the Jewish people much more than most other Jewish thinkers at the time. They were focused on God. They were focused on halakha. They were focused on tradition. They were focused on preservation of the status quo. Kaplan was focused on the Jewish people who were then living, and he was meeting and experiencing in the teens before 1934, when all those articles got put into Judaism as a civilization, the ideas in all those articles. That, for me, the focus shifting from God, mitzvot, obligation, Sinai, to what do Jews need now? What's the pathway for Jews now? Was the revolutionary moment for me that attracted me to Reconstructionism. And I think more than anything, although there are many other influences, I think, as I look back, but more than anything, gave me the idea that I could be a rabbi. I could not have been a rabbi without learning from Mordecai Kaplan through his books. So I would say that was the most profound aspect. Kaplan said something like, Jews have always been honest, or have attempted to be honest. By that I meant intellectually honest. And I think that is true to the point for those who want to be intellectually honest. It's not true for those Jews who want to deny what's going on in the real world and scientific and social scientific thinking. So for me, that was a revolutionary idea. The Kaplan Center, I wanted to express my appreciation of the Kaplan Center. Dan Cederbaum was my congregant in Evanston for so many years. He was a model Jewish layperson. I mean, I'm so sad that he's gone, but this is one of the contributions he has made to Judaism. Dan and Karen, they envisioned this, and Jeffrey and so many others carried out, now Elisheva and Jane sharing it. This is a very important part of the Reconstructionist movement, more than I think any of us thought when it began. Because the Reconstructionist movement, as you know, is splintering. I think you know, is splintering a little bit. There is the college and RJ, the Reconstructing Judaism, and the RRA, and they're all sort of one entity. There used to be three entities: the congregational arm, the rabbinic arm, and the college. And they got subsumed under RJ. Always a dangerous thing to have over centralization, especially when you're talking about ideas. And then the center, Kaplan Center, was really a response to the groupthink of the movement, and it wasn't Kaplanian groupthink. And then Beit Kaplan is the newest iteration of this. This is a group of about 80 rabbis, most of whom still belong to the RRA. Some have quit the RRA. Some are not RRC graduates who have joined Beit Kaplan, who want to preserve Reconstructionism, basically on the issues of intellectual honesty and peoplehood/Zionism. So anyone who's been reading the foreword, we don't have to go into detail on this. I will during the question period, if you wish. But there's a problem. There's a problem in the movement, and we dare not ignore it. So again, I do want to thank the Kaplan Center for this. And I hope, there's the quote that's often attributed, and it's really hard to know who actually said it, attributed to the writer George Eliot, so that's a couple hundred years ago, and also to F. Scott Fitzgerald, and then recently to the writer of the movie, Benjamin Button. But the quote is something like, "It's never too late to become the person you want to be or need to be or are destined to be." There are different variations of this quote. I hope it's not too late for Reconstructionism to be the movement it was meant to be. I hope this doesn't sound overly negative, because I am a devoted Reconstructionist, but I'm devoted to Kaplan's idea and not to the dissolution of Kaplan's ideas under the rubric of Reconstructionism. So we need to find our way back. I'll just say another word about the Zionist issue. Kaplan was an Achad Ha'am kind of Zionist, right? He saw Zion as the hub, and the spokes of the wheel were the diasporic communities. So he was not just a political, but he was certainly also a political Zionist. He lived in the Jewish state in his last few years, or towards in his 90s. And Eretz Yisrael becoming not Yisrael, the land of Israel, becoming the state of Israel, was important to him. And I do think it would be very troubling for him to see peoplehood and Zionism reduced in the movement to an opinion rather than an essential principle. And I say this as somebody who's active in J Street, believe in a two-state solution. I believe that the Netanyahu government is abhorrent, but seeing how far some in the movement have gone, kind of to the Jewish voice for peace end of the spectrum, is anything but Kaplanian. Okay, now to Elisheva's questions that she sent to Lee and me. Um, I had the privilege of being the rabbi of two Reconstructionist synagogues. The Jewish Reconstructionist congregation in Evanston, Illinois, suburban Chicago, and in Southern California, Irvine, California, University Synagogue, from which I recently retired. And what I learned, one of the questions that Elisheva asked was about the lasting influence of Kaplanian thought. I think my whole approach to caring about Amcha, caring about the Jewish people realistically, not feeling I'm a gatekeeper to preserve the past, but rather a gate opener, all doors and windows open to invite people in, especially Jews who say, I'm an out of practice Jew, I'm a non-practicing Jew. I don't believe in God. All the things they want to say to rabbis to shock them, in a way kind of delight me because I think they're thinking about complex issues, realistic issues. I don't understand ultra-Orthodox Jews. I don't understand Chabad. I don't understand people who think God gave the Torah at Sinai and the Talmud is an interpretation of God's divine word and we have to live by it. I don't understand those people. Those people are irrational to me, or at least non-rational to me. I mean, I understand it intellectually, but I can't grasp it psychologically. I'm not enamored of the Kotel anymore, like I was when I went to Israel when I was 16 years old for the first time. Jerusalem does not have the same impact on me because I know that so many of those people on the bus that goes from the central bus station to the wall, and I see them shuckling and davening and looking at a book of Psalms in order to close themselves off from the world, even on a 20-minute bus ride. Those are not the Jews that I recognize as what Judaism could be. They would keep us stuck in the past. The Jews I recognize are the ones who are intellectual, who are trying to be honest in their thinking, who are struggling whether they're an atheist or agnostic or a humanist, or they want a relationship to Judaism, but they can't find a path in. And I think it's true, although Kaplan said nothing Jewish is alien to me, and I know what he meant by it, I think, that everything can be reinterpreted. I don't think it's totally true. I think some things have to be left on the shelf. He was able to leave women's inequality, inferiority in Judaism on the shelf. There are many other things I think he would leave on the shelf today. Kaplan was complex and not always consistent because he was always thinking. You know what they say about, hobgoblin of the mind, right? That he was always in a way reinventing himself because he wanted to reconcile modernity with an ancient tradition. He was open to change. He was not a risk taker personally. Anyone who has read the diaries, thank you, Mel, for that. Anyone who's read the diaries, especially the part where he was so upset with the Jewish Center, that is the first synagogue that he had attempted to bring innovation to. And when he left there, he thought of like quitting the rabbinate and selling insurance, and he would have been a terrible insurance salesman. But he wasn't a risk taker. So you can imagine he has all of these progressive ideas about how to reshape Judaism, but his personality is conservative. His thinking is radical, but his personality is conservative. I don't know how many people have seen the movie Conclave, which is especially relevant this week for the election of a new pope. But in the movie, one of the candidates for becoming pope, I won't give away the ending of the movie, says the church is not just history and tradition. It's what we do from here on in. And I think that was Kaplan's approach to Judaism. It was wanting to continue the sancta, the ideas of the past, but not to be enslaved by them. Kaplan was curious, he was skeptical, he was innovative, he was creative. The past is entitled to a vote, but not a veto. And that, I think, is very much a part of the lasting influence of Reconstructionism to this day. Second question by Elisheva was evaluating Kaplan. In the exact question was, has your evaluation of Kaplan changed over the years? I don't think basically it has. I think I'm still indebted to the formative ideas that I said before, religious anthropologist, more than theologian. And, Kaplan wasn't a prophet. Even prophets weren't prophets, right? They were political analysts. They didn't really predict the future. They interpreted, the way the future could possibly be, so to speak. So he could, you can't say Kaplan, you can apply Kaplan's thought easily to everything. But I do think when you look at his books, that, one of the bookshelves behind me, books or Kaplan's books, you see there is progression from Judaism as a civilization until the religion of ethical nationhood. It's not always consistent, but his world broadened. It wasn't just reshaping the Jewish people. It was understanding the Jewish people and Jewish thought as important in the marketplace of contemporary religious, spiritual, ethical, political ideas. So I think that he clearly had the ability to grow, and I think his influence is lasting. And I think, even Moses in the famous Talmudic story of he's in the back of the Talmudic Academy, and they say, this is the Torah of Moses. And Moses said, what is this? This isn't me. This isn't the Torah. But Kaplan's Torah, I think, is sufficiently expansive. I think he would have welcomed inclusivity to a degree. Again, he was a prisoner of his time. He probably could have not imagined all that inclusivity today implies. I think he would have had a welcoming approach to intermarried families. I don't know if he would have been so happy with theological apologetics or Jewish renewal, and certainly not anti-Zionism. Third question Elisheva asked is there a Kaplanian core concept that you find less or more useful than at the start of your career? Well, I think it's not so much a concept. I think it's in learning about Kaplan's life experience. Here's someone who was dislodged from the European experience to the American experience, from orthodoxy to Columbia University, to Teachers College. I mean, it was to the New York intellectual Jewish scene, was in the first graduating class of the Jewish Theological Seminary, went to a kind of what you might call a modern Orthodox synagogue, the Jewish Center, had to then leave there to create the SAJ. So his roles changed. Sometimes he had to not be too far to the left, and sometimes he had to be sufficiently to the left to make changes. I think synagogues are difficult arenas in which to function for rabbi. I don't know if Lee agrees with me. We'll find out in a few minutes. But being a rabbi is hard. It's a privilege. It's a pleasure. I have to say personally, I've loved being a rabbi, especially kind of bringing people back to Judaism, helping them discover things that were meaningful to them in Judaism. But it is hard being a leader of a congregation and also playing a therapeutic role. Because one day, you're at a board meeting and you're challenging ideas and you're pushing ideas. And the next day, somebody at that board meeting comes to you for counseling. It's a very weird role. That's why you don't know where your therapist lives and your therapist doesn't hang out with you, right? There has to be distance. And your rabbi isn't just your Jewish friend. It's a very unusual, unique role. And I think that Kaplan's struggles throughout his life experience with Jews, the Jewish community. He was very lucky to have very loyal SAJ people who supported him and were grateful to have him as the rabbi. But, he had a tough time at JTS. And even though there was the Kaplan faction and the non-Kaplan faction, even though he was loved by people who I would say were more realists, who saw the future more than the past, he wasn't treated with the honor that Talmudic scholars were treated with. And feel the whole idea of homiletics was seen as, a lightweight preoccupation, even though that's what the pulpit is about to a great degree. It's about making Jewish tradition relevant to people's lives individually and collectively. So I think it's Kaplan's life that inspired me, in not just specific concepts. I mentioned the concepts before about rationalism and peoplehood. Another question was about other thinkers. So yes, I was influenced by Martin Buber, by the poetry of his theology, by his I thou individualism, way to treat people, but still more by Kaplan. Kaplan was prosaic. He was not poetic in his writing, but he was group oriented. And I think it's an important corrective to the over individualized societies in which we live. And then another question was, and I'm kind of winding down here, what does it mean to you to be Kaplan inspired yet open to the influence of other Jewish thinkers? Other Jewish thinkers idealize the tradition very often. They're trying to say this is the best tradition. These are all the things you as a modern can derive from the tradition to make your life better. Because somewhere in their thinking is still the idea of chosenness. Even when Reform Judaism had that cutesy line so many decades ago, struggling with the idea of chosenness, and some Reform thinkers said, oh, we're not chosen, we're not the chosen people, we're the choosing people. Avoiding the whole issue, right? Turning a significant ethical imperative that Kaplan wrestled with. I'm talking about God wrestlers, Yisrael. Kaplan wrestled with the hard ideas. He did not try to avoid them. And so other Jewish thinkers, while there are things I've derived from them, Kaplan put us in the flow of world civilization. He put us in the flow of humanity, saying we're not chosen. We have a vocation that we choose ourselves, that is human-centered. And to dethrone God is no small achievement, especially for, even if not a theologian, a religious anthropologist. God, it's tzimtzum, it's modern tzimtzum. God had to be reduced to make a place for humanity, to make the place for humanity. Moses had to be put back in the Haggadah, right? The traditional Haggadah, God did everything. Liberal Haggadahs, Moses is back on the scene. Doesn't matter if Moses is historically true. There is the message that human beings make things happen. And then the last question, I think, was about Who else influenced the rabbinate? So Everett Gendler, because of time, I don't want to keep going, but Everett Gendler, Eugene Weiner, both conservative rabbis. Gendler, experimental and innovative in Judaism at the Princeton Jewish Center. Eugene Weiner, a social activist rabbi who made Aliyah, taught at the University of Haifa. Bob Seltzer, who I mentioned earlier, my Jewish history and philosophy teacher. Harold Schulweis, one of the most impressive rabbis, pulpit rabbis I've ever met, continues to inspire me. Did my wedding, he to me is the model rabbi. And Ira Eisenstein, because Ira Eisenstein taught me you can be a sophisticated intellectual, you can be culturally literate in America and the world, and still be a rabbi, an activist for Judaism, right? And there are so many others. And I would then add my congregants, maybe, most of all, because their questions, their problems with Judaism, and their ability for me to see Judaism isn't something theoretical. It's the medium of connection to how human beings relate to each other, how Jewish human beings relate to each other, and how people come into the Jewish community, how we relate to each other, and how we go out into the world community and relate to each other. So thank you.
Super. Thank you so much, Arnie. I did put the questions in the chat for people who are wanting to follow along. And I will, yeah.
Let me just say, stay tuned for next year. One of our webinars will focus on chosenness. We've already decided that.
Yes, excellent. So I think with no preamble, or maybe with the ancient preamble of Monty Python, and now for something completely different. I will turn the screen over to Lee.
Not so very different. Arnie and I were born approximately at the same time into a very, very interesting Jewish world, a post-Holocaust, if there can be something called post-Holocaust, at birth of a nation sort of world. We were both children of the 60s, and certainly challenged by the culture of the times, and went through many of the same questions in the explorations. And I, too, was very attracted to Reconstructionism, a course in Jewish existentialism at Temple University taught by Dr. Maurice Friedman, who was a Buber scholar, who opened the world of Kaplan to me. And although I too love Martin Buber, and I'll say something about Buber's work in terms of people who have influenced my rabbinate, it was poetic and beautiful. And I realized early on that I'm not a person who's particularly interested in metaphysics. I'm the kind of guy that takes the car to the mechanic, and the mechanic says, let me tell you what's wrong with the car. And I say, no, thank you. I don't have time for that. Just fix it. And so issues like how the world came to be, or my most favorite question to be asked is, Rabbi, is there life after death? And my sensitive, empathetic response is, you got someone else to do your laundry and your grocery shopping. What are you worried about, Olam when there's stuff to do here? You don't have a phone call to make to a friend? So I have to say, my portal into Reconstructionism was what I think that Ira first called the Copernican revolution in Jewish thought, from a supernatural, God-centered philosophy to people-centered. And I had made my way. I grew up in a secular home, but was sent to a yeshiva as a kid because I grew up in a bad neighborhood. And of course, my rebellion was to get very much involved with Zen Buddhism. In college, I sat in Zazen with tefillin and a kippah. I wish I had a photograph of that time and the like, but it was Kaplan who allowed me to make my way back into a very brief hiatus from Jewish life into the Jewish world by way of the Jewish people. So I would say theologically, Kaplan is certainly, Kaplan's philosophy is an underpinning principle, but it's, and I shouldn't say but, and it's one that sits very beautifully on a shelf that I draw from when I have nothing else to think about. But I would say that I was eager to move on from that quite quickly. So and Elisha, your questions were really terrific. Thanks so much. It really helped pinpoint so much of this. So what's been the most lasting influence of Kaplan on my work, and what concept has been most useful from the start of my career? So as with Arnie, my career has been in the pulpit rabbinate. 44 of my years has been spent at the Reconstructionist of the North Shore. And I was given this gift by Ira. Ira Eisenstein preceded me. Then Dennis Sasso was here for 2 years. And then I was fortunate enough after a long period of interviews and performances and the like, to have been asked to come. Ira, when he came for the installation, looked at the congregation and he said, so what I have to say to you is don't mess it up this time, guys. Not talking about Dennis, but don't mess it up this time. And then he turned to me and he said, I'm giving you a treasure. Take good care of it and don't you mess it up. And so I think it was that warning by Ira that set the stage. So when I think about the core principle, I do think about that Copernican revolution, not part A about God, but part B about people, Jewish people and Jewish peoplehood. So I really do believe that for me as a Reconstructionist rabbi, life is with the people. Once a long time ago, someone asked me in the course of a seminar where we were actually studying a book by Abraham Joshua Heschel, which is unusual for us in the congregation, what kind of Jew I would be if I were alone on a desert island. And my response was that I would be a pagan of the Jewish persuasion. I mean, how can you be a Jew without Jews? And this one spot, this one dot in the universe. And disturbingly, the question was raised in a very perverted form by one of our rabbinic interns. We, and thanks for a very long time to Carol Blumenthal, who's online, we sponsored a 5-time-a-year visit from a student at the Rabbinical College who came to be with us. And this student had spent, and during one of the visits, the intern stays with me. Which is both a thrilling and horrifying experience for the intern. And do I have to take my shoes off and my socks? But So this guy, it was a very full weekend. We had a congregational dinner, and then we had a terrific Shabbat service where things went a little off kilter in the discussion, and it very, very entertaining. The next morning there was a splendid a splendid service that included our family Devar Torah, which is how a bar or bat mitzvah presents themselves within the context of family. We start by Jody going to their kitchen table to talk about the Torah portion like half a year before, and then they sit at the Torah table to teach Torah from our table. It was a great discussion, and then followed by my twice a month seminar, Shabbat seminar, where we were discussing some element of Zionism that year. That was the one-year seminar that took 7 years to complete. And we came home, and I put lunch on the table, and excuse my expression, the kid said, "So can I ask you a question?" I said, "Sure." He said, "When do you get to have Shabbos?" And I said, "What are you talking about?" So, like when you get to have Shabbos. I said, "Didn't you eat that dinner last night? And weren't you there for the conversation? And how about this morning? And I mean, wasn't that Shabbos to you?" And he really did not understand it. And again, Arnie, what you said about, individual spirituality and the like, I respect it, but I do not understand it. I have to say, the computer just said, "It sounds like you might have switched to a different language. Please update it so we can provide better quality transcription." Well, can someone talk to that person? I mean, so, but the point is that, and I said to him, I hope that someday, if you decide to go into the public rabbinate, that you find a congregation where you do not have to separate yourself from them to have Shabbos. And that is a sort of a general concern of mine in this age of individual spirituality. I can't talk about a core concept other than focus on Jewish peoplehood, but I thought that I would give you the first thing that happened liturgically or ritually when I came to the congregation, and how it set a template, a paradigmatic template for the time to come. And it's a prosaic example, but it's on purpose a prosaic example because I think it's something that has informed my rabbinate, my life with this congregation of the past 44 years. So the first ritual decision that had to be made was sounding the shofar on Shabbat. Our congregation grew out of a chavurah. The chavurah had about 1 million worth of people, and they met at different people's basements to read word by word different texts by Mordecai Kaplan. It took them about 2 years to work through Judaism as a civilization, and they went on to the meaning of God and modern Jewish religion. A very, very wonderfully schooled group. And they were all members of conservative synagogues. At one point, after 10 years, they decided enough of this of this division. Just because we're studying Kaplan, it won't kill us to daven. It won't kill us to daven. And besides which, we don't feel like going back to the old shul and paying dues there. Let's do something together. And they did. By time I came, the congregation was greening, and there were people with families, and they wanted their kids to hear the shofar on Shabbat. And they came to the guy who was sort of the ritual person at the time. And in a splendid show of respect, this guy deferred to me and said, "Look, you're the rabbi. Why don't you decide?" And I said, "Why don't we decide?" And by we, I mean the congregation. So I set up a system. I looked at the resources and printed up the resources. The guy in question decided to set up 5 town meetings at different times so that different populations should come. And the town meetings, which were guaranteed to be no more than an hour and a quarter. This was before Zoom. We studied. Then people articulated values that would inform keeping the tradition or abandoning the tradition. And then each person who attended the town meeting got a ballot, which was placed in a sealed ballot box. And it was after all of the 5 town meetings met that we unsealed the boxes, and in a public way, we counted the votes. And interestingly, our congregation decided to have a compromise so that we decided together that we would sound the shofar at the shacharit service after the Torah reading, but with respect to other people who might come from different backgrounds, that we would silence the shofar at Musaf. It was absolutely fantastic. But it's not the end of the story. What makes the story even better, and Jane, I don't know whether you remember this, but Joy was then rabbi of B'nai Keshet. And she thought that this was absolutely nifty. And so she brought the same documents with the same study and process to B'nai Keshet. And they met. And of course, they decided, and B'nai Keshet, at a certain point, many of the people were a break-off from a conservative shul and everything. They voted not to sound the shofar at all on Shabbat. And I use this example to people who want to know what's Reconstructionism all about. And of course, this is an example that it's not about uniform practice. It's about the way that we make decisions. So what Reconstructionist processes or principles were brought into play? The democratic process, thanks to us living in 2 civilizations, the process of giving the past a vote and educating people as to that past vote, and certainly not a veto, a consideration about the organic nature of Jewish community. People in our congregation were concerned about the issue of Moret Ayin. We are already thought of as the tie-dyed, granola crunching Jews of the North Shore. Will this not put us over the edge? Oh, if they could just see ahead. And of course, defining laic empowerment. So this process and these principles have continued to inform us. And I want to use 2 recent examples to show how this has come into play in a broader and number one, in a broader way, and also number 2, in a particularly poignant way. So we use this process to reevaluate the congregation's position concerning the inclusion of non-Jews in ritual practice. I should say that the only ritual principle that was part of the congregation's bylaws concerned who could come to the Torah, which was extremely restricted. So the bylaws, when I came here, were already old. And that particular point had never been reviewed. But we've had a dramatic increase in the number of mixed married families in the congregation. When we moved to our new building, our present building, in 1992, we had 2 families in the congregation who were intermarried. At that time, Egon Meyer, Zichrono Livracha, a very famous sociologist who studied out marriage in Judaism, who came from actually a Hasidic background, took a look at the numbers, and he announced, we are doing something that's very, very wrong here, that we should have so few intermarried families. Well, we now have about 35% of the congregation who are intermarried, and people unknowingly were very, very restricted in terms of who could come to the bima. For example, when their kid became bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah and the like. We had a dramatic occurrence, which was we had an officer of the congregation who came to the open honor that we have every Shabbat because no one else was coming forward, and she belted out the Torah blessings and the like. Mary is a sometimes practicing Catholic who was vice president of the synagogue. The Rabbi at the time, who was also ritual director, put his finger to his lips to make sure that I did not do anything that might embarrass Mary, even for the sake of the community. And after services, this guy also came from a Hasidic background. He said, look, we have to change this practice. And so again, we embarked now on a 2-year study of the position of non-Jews in various periods of Judaism, in all periods of Judaism, with values and the like. Very, very controversial, very, very lively discussions in the many, many sessions. And there were two recensions of these groups. And because it was in the bylaws, it had to go before the congregation in a vote. By the time we got to that process, we voted on a new category that was called Jewish enough, which is self-defined. It asked if a person feels Jewish enough, believes himself, herself, themselves to be Jewish enough, they can come forward to the Torah. And in fact, they can participate completely and openly in the ritual, in any ritual practice in the congregation. Went before the entire congregation. We were a little nervous about it. It passed by acclamation. And when the president who was running the meeting said, are there any comments, any issues? There is someone stood up and said, it's time to eat. And so that's what we did, exercise and communal process. We used the same process when the college had asked us to kind of weigh in on graduating candidates for ordination who were involved in non-Jewish partners. Believe it or not, this I would say more than half the congregation thought that that was already a policy of the college in the smaller groups. And so most of the people who came to the smaller discussion groups this time were not in favor of it immediately. Because of the nature of this, because it was considered to be very, very technical, and because it's so broad-based, Jody and I were asked to run the sessions. You should know that both Jody and I did not think that we did not approve of this ruling for many, many reasons, but we were very firm. And we had spoken about our concerns at our rabbinical association, at the meetings of our rabbinical association. So we met and we discussed and we argued, and people asked us for the first time, I think, ever in the congregation, what our feelings were about this issue. And we told them that it was none of their business, that we had a voice elsewhere. And I have to say that after discussions, and here there were negative opinions and there were abstentions. And usually in past times, there was consensus by the end of these meetings. In this case, there wasn't. The votes were counted. And overwhelmingly, I mean, really overwhelmingly, members of the congregation said, we can go along with this. Because of the structure of the bylaws, it was the board that had to write the letter to the college. And they wrote a letter saying that, look, overwhelmingly, the members of the congregation said, go and be well. But we as a board cannot say that we would necessarily employ such a rabbi. 2 years later, a new position opened up in the congregation, which was a rabbinic position, which was a rabbinic educator's position. And we received an application from a to-be graduate of the college, and someone advised us that this person was intermarried. And, we should know that. And Jody and I looked at the email and said, what difference does that make? Within that 2-year period, we had seen the evolution, our own revolution, as mirror to general evolution, as saying, this should not be an impediment. What does it mean to be Kaplan inspired, yet open to the influence of other thinkers? And who else, actually it says other Jewish thinkers, but then it said who else has influenced your rabbinate? So I took that as a permit here. I thought that this was the most interesting question to think through, by the way. I certainly think of how Kaplan was influenced by Durkheim and Dewey and by other out of the Jewish world thinkers of his time. In terms of Jewish thinkers, I still go back to Buber, I would say, on an occasion, especially when I think about my political thinking, but also in terms of my biblical studies and teaching. I have an ongoing Bible seminar. We're now in our third iteration in the past 44 years. We're only up to Devarim. So I don't know whether I'll survive the end of it, but Kaplan certainly has influenced, along with critical thinkers, has influenced my work with the Bible. But even more, and when and Arnie, you struck on this, and so I'm glad to be able to think about it. But even more, both Buber and Kaplan opened me to the place of art and music and poetry and dance and Judaism. Arnie, your Bob Gluck is right next to you, so I'm very pleased to use all of those words with you sitting next to one another. This is it kind of thrills me. Many of you know that so much of my life is concerned with the arts, particularly with painting, photography, poetry, and music and dance. I guess that covers it all. And certainly Kaplan spoke expansively about Judaism being a civilization. Buber was more hands-on, by the way. He wrote poetry very, very dense. He wrote a play, which was terrible and unproducible. And he wrote a novel, which could generously be called a slog. But he also was a theater and a dance reviewer. I mean, the guy had to make a living, so he did that. And one of his dance reviews was of Nijinsky, when the dancer Nobel was in his at his apex, and in this short review, his entire philosophical tendency is contained. It's not only talking about Nijinsky, but it was the spiritual value or the performance that is absolutely soaring. So when I got to this question, Alicia, I looked at what was on my desk. And so on my desk, I have a very ordered office. I told my last therapist that my favorite TV show was Law and Order, and he started to laugh hysterically. He said, "What a surprise, Law and Order." So at the right hand of my desk is what I'm doing this week. So this week at the right hand desk, I have this essay, which I recommend, by Hannah Arendt, that was published in Commentary magazine in 1948. In 1948, that's titled "There is Still Time to Save the Jewish Homeland." She too was very, very much influenced by Ahad Ha'am. We just finished studying the land of Israel from Kaplan's Judaism as a Civilization. And we studied, of course, Herzl again. And so the connections that she makes are very, very interesting. There's an essay by some professor in Toronto about the dots over the 11 letters in Deuteronomy 29-28, which is part of this week's Bible study, and a collection of poems entitled Selective Translations by the poet W.S. Merwin, and I want to glean a reading for Friday night from that. On the other end of the desk are things that I pick up and I peruse, and this is it's actually for, believe it or not, high holidays, but it's also to begin to fill out my thinking. So what's there? There is a monograph on the artist George Seurat, and a book on Laban notation, Bob. So Laban notation was a system to record dance that was written by Rudolf von Laban in the 1920s, that was refined by a disciple of his, Anne Hutchinson. And the nice cantor of our congregation gave me this book as a gift. So Seurat was the most famous and the best practitioner of a post-impressionist form of painting called pointillism, which is a system of juxtaposing dots of color, so that if you stand somewhat from afar, that is, if you stand from a point of perfection, of perspective, you can see parasols and trees and monkeys and dogs and people emerge. I too, Arnie, am finding it increasingly difficult to be in this world of Jewish irrationality. It drives me crazy. And the one thing that I think that I have lost with age is a certain amount of energy, but also I've lost patience. I just don't have time for this anymore. And I've become increasingly aware how siloed our communities, our Jewish communities, are in the United States. At the same time, that we are, and I'll use the word targeted, as being a collectivity. And I can't get my mind around it, but Seurat is helping me. Different people, different philosophies right next to one another. I see the different colors if I look closely and as a critic of Jewish life in the United States. But for people outside of Judaism, they're standing at a perspective where there isn't much difference between me and the Orthodox in Brooklyn or whatever. We're both New York Jews and the like. In terms of the Latin notation, so I have to tell you that I've never learned to read music. I don't know why. I mean, I can, as Judy says, you can tell what's up and down, but that's about as far as I go. And so, for example, this week, I'm working with chapter 31 of Deuteronomy, which is a mess. I mean, there are contradictions and there are duplications and there are interruptions and shifts of terminology and ambiguity and the like. And what my new study of Latin notation has helped me understand is how difficult it is to capture events that are so essential, but seen through different generations of Jews within many different contexts. I still haven't figured out how words and pictograms can really indicate the fullness of something like the first pas de deux and the second act of Swan Lake. Tell me, how do you picture that, especially if you've seen Makarova dance with Baryshnikov? But it's the best that we have. It's the only way that we can really see Nijinsky. Nijinsky being dead and all of that, of course. So I close with this. My office library has shelving for about 350 books. Whenever I buy, and they're filled, of course, the shelves are filled. So when I buy a book in the course of the year, I lay it out on the floor of my office and, very neatly and with bookends so that I can see where they are and the like. And then around Pesach time, when I clean the shelves of my office, I then take books down and reshelve them. The books that come down are put in a box that's marked with the date, and good old Daniel takes them up to the to Never World, the storage room behind the never used choir loft. About 5 years ago, I packed up the Talmud to make room for the poets. Last year, I packed up about 20 volumes of liturgical resources to make room for studies in political theory. So given my genetic history, as Langston Hughes would say, given my genetical background, I am living on gravy, if not fumes, in terms of the old age department. I've begun going through the stored books. And I'm seeing what I packed up. So I've gone through 10 boxes of books. And out of the 10 boxes of books, I was sorry about 2. I retrieved 2 books. One was Michael Walzer's Exodus and Revolution. It must have been a mistake that I put that away. It's a fabulous and important book. And the other book that I saved was a very carefully annotated copy of Shakespeare's Macbeth. This practice is a constant and a visceral re-understanding of the dynamic of the evolutionary nature of Jewish life, of the broad encompassing expanse of Jewish living, of the balance between the Jewish past and the Jewish present, and the content and of the context of it within the evolving nature of American and Israeli and Jewish civilizations exist.
Wow, thank you both so very much. What a privilege to hear from you and to hear the paths that are resonant between you and the places where you've moved into your own strengths and your own loves. You know, I'm conscious of our time, and there are probably people who want to ask questions. So I would love to hear from each of you. What struck you about what the other person said? Was there something that made you say, oh, yes, absolutely, that's my experience as well? Or was there something where you said, that's fascinating, I wouldn't have imagined that?
I would say I agree with everything that Arnie said. And you know, when he spoke about, you know, the nature of the rabbinate, and you know, it's interesting. My last congregation, which was a poor congregation, came with they couldn't make me a decent offer, so they said, you know, we have a house, and I said, please, please keep the house. Of course, I had driven by and saw this lovely neighborhood with one house on the block that said, could you adopt me? Could you really please take care of me? And all the rest. But I said, rent the house, pay me the rent. And if it's more than, if it's, you can make more than my rent, you'll get to keep it. So I do think that the rabbinate is complicated. Being a pulpit rabbi is complicated, especially with the board. I learned quite early on that I would never, ever negotiate after a very bad negotiation experience. I said, I will never, ever directly negotiate with you again. I'm not interested in that. And it's tough. But again, Ira led the way. You know, as long as he and Judy came with him, had a great bottle of scotch, everything was terrific. And so people learn to buy very expensive stuff.
And I would say that, first of all, you know, I'm delighted to be on this Zoom with Lee, who is, you know, my classmate and, you know, one of my favorite people at the college as students, and how he is the same as he was. I mean, I'm glad that I mean, I feel I'm the same that I was when we entered in 1970. And I know so many people who are not the same as they were 50 plus years ago. And the delight I have is really that, you know, that Lee has stayed true to who he is. He has, you know, we've all hopefully grown, right, and had wonderful life experiences. But there's something about the the authenticity of an old friend that you know, I very much appreciate hearing, like I did at your Torat Yovel a few months ago. So you know, I think we're open to questions from people.
Let's start with Mel, whose hand is up. If you put your hand up, it's easy for me to call on you.
Okay, I want to thank you both very, very much. I saw a theme in both of your remarks, which of course is right on, and that is the movement from God to people in Kaplan. And that is, of course, central. I just wanted to mention and Kaplan never left God. He struggled all his life with the relationship between people and God. And perhaps that's why his ideas are so complex. He said, for example, that it's like a stick, and the self is on one end and God is on the other end. So the question is, how do we unpack that and how do we make it meaningful? The other point that I want to mention in connection with the movement to the individual is the concept of growth. Uh, Kaplan was, of course, Lee mentioned this, and I think maybe Arnie too, a disciple of Dewey, and Dewey is the philosopher of growth. So the question is, how does the congregation and the rabbi help us to grow as Jews, help us to grow as individuals, help us to grow as Zionists? I think that's the issue is that confronts us at the moment. And I want to say that Charles Magid gave Kaplan credit for being the grandfather of renewal, and that Zalman stands on Kaplan's shoulders. Thank you.
Thank you, Mel. I know that Beth had a question earlier or wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, I guess briefly, it's how to apply all this to the current problem, at least in my congregation, about that forward article. It wasn't really an article, it was an opinion piece. And Rabbi Arne mentioned it in the beginning, and I'm looking at my question. The forward itself added corrections, and I've heard other information that was contradictory to what was in that op-ed piece, including that there was only 2 or only 1 anti-Zionist graduate. So my question is kind of how to apply all this to this problem. Was there anything in Kaplan's thought about Zionism and also about dialogue and differing opinions that could apply to this problem? And I'll just add, my own synagogue, we had a vote. We decided to stay in the movement, but we're still going to talk about it, about defining ourselves and how we relate to it's going to be another year. So if anybody has some ideas, I'd appreciate it.
Do you want us to listen to the questions and then try to comment after we've heard all the questions?
I think it might be easier if we take them one at a time because they may be of radically different subject matter. And this one is a complicated one, I think, for everybody. For those people who don't know, I'm a rabbi in England, in Old York, and we are having quite a new visitation of this question as well. So it would be lovely to hear each of you reflect a little.
Let me just say that our congregation, certainly, which is a classical, Arnie and I are classical reconstructionists. We are practical, rational, intellectual people who, we studied with the best. We studied with Ira, and certainly who influenced us very, very greatly. Our congregation has opened ourselves up to study and also to getting as much information from different sources as we can. So, for example, this morning I was on a Zoom with this guy Julian Resnick, who is sort of like a famous Israeli guide in Israel, and he who lives on the kibbutz in the north, and he is with us twice a month. I had a 7-year-long seminar on Zionism, its ideology and history, beginning with the 1850s, mid-1800s. And that seminar has morphed this year into a re-examination of classical Zionist thinkers. And the rule in the seminar is that you can ask questions about the writer. You cannot give your opinion about the writer. That's for a different time. There are plenty of opportunities to do that. So I think that, one of the happens that Jody Sif's son is running on the slate of the World Zionist Congress. It's slate number 16, Hatikva, which is a progressive Zionist slate. And I see someone being excited about that, which is great. Oh, very excited about it. Give that man his medicine. I think that it is important to keep the conversation going, but not just to hear people talk, but to give them the wherewithal where they can have dialogue with knowledge. So I think that, again, it's very important to study and to read so that you can have an informed opinion.
So let me respond first to Mel's comment. I think Kaplan, in a humanistic, naturalistic, transnationalistic, naturalistic way, was God intoxicated, right? He really needed to keep a place for God in his conceptualization. He was, kind of like Rambam, like Maimonides, struggling to say we can't say what God is, but we can say what God isn't. He needed to preserve, this, key element of Judaism. If today I define God with the term salvation in, the way Kaplan did, people wouldn't understand, and they would think it's a little absurd because they don't even understand what the word salvation means. So, because they think of sort of the Christian English, rather than the Hebrew tradition. But usually, this is what I've said for years, variants of this, that God is the force or power within us that moves us towards being loving and caring people. I think that is sufficient for me, and it's about all that I can believe. I really can't say more about God than that. And I would say I've probably moved more in a humanistic direction than that over the years. When Lee said earlier, I don't like to deal with metaphysical questions, right? I think that there is a place in my reconstructionism, I'm just talking about me now, I have a little bit of a space left for the God force or power within us. I do not have any space for a personal supernatural God. My Torah Yovel, I talked a lot about why I could not be a traditional believer in any way. But so my focus is really on the humanistic side, not where humanistic Judaism is with his kind of wiped out liturgy and all that stuff. But I'm saying I really think I'm a religious humanist. And I'm very comfortable with that. I can say religious naturalist. Okay, it also works. But I think Kaplan was different. I think he really needed to see a strong place for God in the equation. If people are agnostics or atheists or humanists or whatever they want to call themselves, that just doesn't, that's perfectly fine with me. It's more rational to be an agnostic, atheist, or humanist than it is to be a traditional believer. So I would rather, I understand people on that end of the spectrum better than I do traditionalists. The comment about Zionism is, I don't know if there are one or two anti-Zionists in the college or the RRA. I don't believe it's one or two. And again, I'm going to say again, I'm a J Street person. I abhor Netanyahu. But I find that inclusivity has become the theology of the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College and for some people of the RRA. Inclusivity. To me, that's not an ideology. That's something functionally you do to broaden the parameters and welcome people into, and it's a kind of a virtue signaling of, we're not as bad as the Jews who will do anything in the name of Zionism. That's what so bothers me, that there is just like there isn't much attention at the college to classical Reconstructionism. It's a kind of like, ultimately individuals, when they graduate, sure, they can believe what they want to believe. But while they're at the school, I really think they need to have a firm foundation of classical Reconstructionism, of Kaplan. They have to be emissaries for the movement. They have to at least learn how to be emissaries of the movement. Then they can reject or embrace what they want. I don't see that happening with Kaplanian philosophy, and I don't feel it's happening with Jewish peoplehood. I hear a lot of talk about post-ethnic Judaism. Now, it can mean that we're bringing in people of color and people who didn't grow up Jewish. That's fine with me. But post-ethnic Judaism could also mean peoplehood is reactionary. And that is a complete rejection of Kaplan. Peoplehood is the center of the whole Reconstructionist enterprise. So, that bothers me, and I would just like to see more honesty. I mean, there is, I think, evidence that the problem is more than one or two, and I'd like to see there be honesty about that. And I would like to see someone stand up for classical Reconstructionism, peoplehood, and Zionism in the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College and to some degree within the RRA. By no means do I think the movement is anti-Zionist. I don't think the congregants in the movement are anti-Zionist at all. But I do think that, one of the reasons is that if inclusivity means you even, that everybody is welcome to be in the school, everybody is welcome to be in the movement, you can get to the point of lacking a center, anything essential. And that's what worries me. So I don't think we're too far gone, but I do think, like that quote, that it's never too late to be who we were meant to be.
Thank you so much, both of you. I'm conscious of our time. We've got 2 questions. Can you make them really quick, Bob and Bill? Let's start with Bob because your hand came up first. But you need to unmute, dear.
Okay, so this is a 2-second one, which will take no less than 2 hours to answer. There's some of what I think I see happening at times is there are people who have a lot of opinions about what Kaplan would be saying about X, Y, and Z right now. But I'm curious from either or both of you, and is where do you feel like there are ways in which you could see yourself speaking for Kaplan in this moment, and where does that end? Where is its limits?
Conscious that each of you has a minute to answer that.
Lee, you want to go first?
Thanks, Bob.
I'm unmuting. Okay. Oh, no. I'm unmuted. Okay. Well, I think that again, that Kaplan understood his world, and he was able to address himself to it. Our world is different than Kaplan's world, and I think that the principle is that we are dealing with evolving religious and also sociological frameworks that have to be considered at every point. That Kaplan certainly also has a very, very strong vote, certainly a stronger. I didn't pack Kaplan up to put in those boxes. Kaplan, as a matter of fact, Kaplan has been gradually moving to a more central position in the library. And I also recognize that the past has a vote but not a veto, and that includes Dr. Buber, and it includes Dr. Kaplan. I don't know whether I'm ready to say that about Dr. Eisenstein, but that's okay.
And my quick, first of all, it's nice seeing you, Bob. My quick answer would be that if we're focused on humanism, naturalism, reality, rationalism, peoplehood, then I think Kaplan continues to have a very important message, right? Again, he could not have foreseen the future, like I said earlier. We're not trying to decipher the text of Kaplan as a proof text for contemporary life. That can't be. It's too much to expect of anyone, and it's almost the kind of it's like a Talmudic game, right? I mean, it's something that has kept the Jewish people together. No land but books, right? And argument over ideas and pilpul and all that. But ultimately, I think there are these broad themes in Kaplan that I have to say I don't see in any other contemporary Jewish theologian. I think there's so much richness there. And when I entered the college, and Lee may felt a similar way, I really thought this is so self-evidently obvious that Jews would, once they learned about Reconstructionism, would reject the Baba Mises in favor of this liberating rationalist philosophy. And what I've discovered is that people don't make decisions based on reason often enough.
You and Martin Luther, Arnie.
Say that again?
You and Martin Luther.
You're right. But of course I've made my peace with that. And, like the Hasidic story, we can only light the fire, like at the end. I understand we're not going to reach the world. We're not going to reach the whole Jewish world. We're going to reach a segment of the world that can benefit from us. And all we can do is teach. And hopefully, that if you build it, they will come.
Amen. This does bring us to 9:30. I'm conscious that Bill's going to have a fabulous question and that we are all very interested. So if you can keep your question short and your answers really short, and then we'll have a very short wrap up and tremendous gratitude. So Bill,
And
please.
nice to see Bill again. Oh my God, 70 years.
I said to her today some of my connection to you. Yes, it's great to see you, but also so much of what you just said resonated with me. And I won't get into that now, but I'll focus on where you said there's a divide. Many, many years ago, maybe even decades ago, my brother Jeff, who was conservative trained and very much renewal, said, Bill, your problem is you're a classical reconstructionist in a movement moving towards renewal, or whatever he said. So what, and I, for many years, been involved in a congregation that was really going renewal. I'm now back in my struggling older one. Is there a support group, a community, or whatever, not rabbinical discussion, but for a classical recon? I've kind of asked before and looked for, is there a place, if I get into a convention, is there a room where I go to where I know people can talk. How can we, and maybe later let me know, but I would love to have something where I know what you're saying touches so much of what I want. There's things I could go into, I won't, but is there, call it a community, a support group, call it whatever, a way to say, this is what I want, this is what I think recon should be.
May
Well,
I just say, we have a
This
convention.
is it. I think this is it. I mean,
This is it. Yeah.
Kaplan Center, I think Beit Kaplan wants lay people, not just rabbis, as part of it. And RJ, I'm sure, can set up or maybe has set up these kinds of things.
We
If
have-
somebody can make such a circle, I would love to be informed of it.
There's a Reconstructionist convention planned
Right.
for next year.
Right.
So maybe we can be involved in the planning.
Super. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you so much to our amazing speakers for your time and your thoughtfulness and your wisdom. I think all of us will be rolling your words around in our minds and waking up in the middle of the night and thinking about Nijinsky and wondering how we can, bring ourselves back to that theology of truly understanding love that is the thing that makes personal salvation. So deeply grateful to both of you for your presence in our space here, and to everybody else for joining us, to Jane for co-piloting with me, to Jeffrey, actually, who wrote the questions that I gave to our speakers, and to all of us who are trying to find a way through this morass of a world, which I think is probably a situation that Kaplan felt as well, with courage and with hope. And may we all continue to do so together with that love and with that humor. Thank you so much for the evening.
Thank you.
You.
Thank you all. Good night and good luck.
I'll see you around, Arnie.
Yeah, Lee. Probably in the theater in New York sometime.